Good morning. Welcome. We have Taya returning to the channel today. And she's one of my favorite psychics in the area. And I'm so excited that she's with us today. Thea Strom. And today we have a little different topic than just talking about psychic abilities. Taya, I told you, is a published author, and I'm going to ask her to speak about a book she has written. And it's about her ability to communicate with animals. Wouldn't you love to do that, like Dr. Doolittle, just to be able to talk to the animals and see what they wanted you to know? Because I know with my dogs, I'd sure like to know what they're thinking. Sometimes I can tell, but not all the time. So, Taya, can you tell us about your ability and anything you'd like to say about that, about being able to communicate with animals?
Yeah, so with animal communication, it's essentially an intuitive art, so kind of very similar to mediumship, so connecting to those who have passed away. Connecting to animals is very much connecting soul to soul with them and listening in a very particular way to what they're wanting to communicate. And their communication is coming through as various internal intuitive impressions. So I'll get images in my mind's eye, I'll sometimes hear words in my mind, and I'll feel feelings in my body. And then I put that together to understand what they're trying to communicate. So it very much goes under the umbrella of psychic abilities, but it's a little bit different too.
That's really interesting. So you're connecting with the spirit of an animal that has passed. But are you also able to communicate with an animal that's still living so you can help the owner? And I'm sorry,
Yes,
but my dog is scratching plastic over here. Man,
it's,
stop it.
it's very fitting for today's topic.
Maybe you can
Um,
figure out why she's doing that.
Need to do a little session right now. Yeah, so it actually works the same way. You know, when I was sharing how it functions for me, connecting to an animal, it actually is the same whether they're living or they're past. So the only difference is that when they've passed away, they just happen to not have a body. But either way, it is very much me connecting soul to soul with an animal, whether they're living or past. And with living animals, it is very much about understanding the animal from how they view things from their perspective. And so that also means that I do get to work with animals that are sometimes struggling with certain behaviors in the home, or rather their humans are struggling with their behaviors, and understanding why they're doing it, and how their humans can help them so that they can shift the behavior potentially too.
I think that's great because you can't always tell what your pet needs. If they're feeling not good or whatever, it's nice to have that little bridge for somebody to help you doing that.
Absolutely. And actually, health is often a topic that comes up, or how the animal is feeling physically too. And that's often something that people feel quite lost with their animals too, because sometimes it is hard to tell if they're in pain or if they're struggling in that way too.
I know you can't tell a lot of times if they're in pain or what that discomfort is caused from. So you could fine tune that and help pinpoint what's going on.
Yeah, sometimes you can certainly get a sense of how does the animal feel. Like, they're not always going to have a sense of what caused the issue or what the root of the issue is, but they can share things like where they feel the pain, what level is the pain at, when are they feeling it, and so on. So,
I definitely need to contact you more about my dogs.
mm.
I'm serious. Tell us about what inspired you to write your book.
It was a little bit random. So people ask this question and think I set out with the idea of writing a book, but it is a little bit different. So
Hmm.
for me, I've been teaching animal communication for years, and so it's something that I'm very passionate about doing. And I also know that you've taken a class with me, Karen, at some local stables nearby, working with horses. And so it's something I've loved and taught for years. Never was ever drawn to write a book about it, though. And the reason for that is I've always heard that writing a book is quite a task. As you know, not only is it a task to write it, but getting it published in itself is a huge ordeal. And it just seemed like way too much work for me without a lot of financial gain from it, So it didn't seem like it was worth it. And then a few years ago,
I can relate to that.
I had a couple of sessions with two totally different psychics. One was an astrologer, actually, and he was doing a reading for me for the next year. And he predicted actually that I'd be writing a book. And I kind of just, I sort of brushed it off. I was like, that's never going to happen because I'm not interested, but I kept it in the back of my mind. And then a year went by and I had another reading with another psychic medium, one you would know, Renee Madsen Terrell, and she also predicted that I would be writing a book, and she predicted that I'd be writing a book about animal communication. And again, I very much brushed it off, just, I was like, that's never going to happen. But I thought it was interesting, that two people predicted that. And then a couple of months went by, and I woke up from a dream one day. And in the dream, somebody handed me a sloth. And this will make sense, trust me. But in the dream, somebody just drove up to me, handed me a sloth and said, "Do you want this?" And I was like, "Sure, I guess. Like, I've never wanted a sloth, but I'll take it, a sloth." And obviously, when I woke up from the dream, I felt like I had this feeling that it was very significant. You just get that sense with some dreams. And obviously sloth is they're extremely slow. So, there had to be something about that to it. And I went to go check my emails. And in my emails, there was an email from an editor, from a publisher, asked me ever be interested in writing a book on animal communication.
Oh,
Throughout that time, it's become very clear to me that book writing is probably the slowest process there ever could be. And so the whole symbolism with the sloth and it just kind of being handed to me felt very, very synchronistic, if nothing else, with the dream. And so I said yeah. And the reason I said yes to that was because I had a couple of heads up from the other readings that this would be something that might happen.
I want to ask you later, not during this interview, what your process was, because writing a book is not easy. I mean, a lot of people want to write a book, and kudos, go for it, but no, I'm not going to tell you. It's a process. It really
Oh,
is.
absolutely. Yeah. And I can only imagine for you as well, who was also having to deal with a lot of grief in your process too.
Yeah. I would have thought it would have gotten easier
Mm.
every time because you make edits all the time and you're reading. It didn't get easier. I thought, what's
No.
going on with this? But this is not about me. This is about you. Can you share any particular memorable experience with communicating with animals?
I think for me, some of my more memorable experiences were very early on and kind of before I even started to actively develop the skill. As I talked about in our last interview, I'd always been very interested in anything to do with any of this work and always felt drawn to it. And I've always felt a very deep connection to animals in my life. So as I was starting to develop my mediumship, so late teens, early 20s, is when I started to explore that a lot more on purpose. So I was taking classes in mediumship and psychic abilities. And during that time, we had also just adopted a kitten. And this kitten, my husband and I had always only had grazers in our past. So, cats who would only eat when they're hungry, and stop when they're full. We had adopted this kitten, and one day I was out doing errands. And as part of doing errands, I had to drive by my home to a different place, So, as I was driving by my home, all of a sudden in my mind's eye, I saw an image of a fully empty food bowl. And I heard the words, "I'm hungry," in my mind. And I thought that was very strange because I knew that I had filled that food bowl that morning. It was totally full. There's no possible way that could be empty. And I hesitated because it was so out of the blue. But just in case, I did stop by at home just to double check. And the kitten was sitting right there next to the food bowl, totally empty, and sitting there very expectantly waiting for food. She's one who we've had to get used to. She's one that will just eat as long as there's food available, and will not stop. So
Oh, she's like a goldfish.
yes, really. Yeah, so we had to go from free feeding to doing meals, which she hasn't been too happy about. But that was my first experience of recognizing the animal communicating with me and seeing that it was or being able to validate it essentially. So that's always been very memorable for me.
I think what's really good about that too is you paid attention. You
Yes.
got the message, you didn't negate it, you paid attention and you went and looked and you found out, yeah, I'm hungry. So that's really nice. Is that by any chance? I remember seeing a picture of a kitty in the class and it was I think
Hmm.
a black and white kitty.
Yes.
Was that the
That
kitty?
that would be Gilly. Yes, that's the cat.
That cat was well fed.
Yes.
Very beautiful. And it's such a
Yes.
beautiful cat. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a gorgeous one, and I like to use her a lot as a teacher in my classes because she's also a very vocal cat, and she likes to be very, communicative and talkative. And you'll find that each, every animal is very individual and their personalities, but also in terms of how good of a communicator they are or how interested they are in communicating. And she's always been very good at it, and so I tend to use her quite a bit for my classes.
Yeah, and I want to touch on your classes later. In your book, and I'm going to show your book, can you discuss various methods for communicating with animals? Is there a particular one that you find most effective for yourself?
So when it comes to animal communication, kind of the essence of the steps to communicate, there's a couple of steps that I find are necessary to connect and have a good session with an animal. So for me, the way I like to do it, always before the session, I'll take some time to meditate just to get centered and calm, release all of my own thoughts so that I can go into the session as neutral as possible. And then what I like to do is I like to visualize.
They heard something.
Yes. So I like to visualize a light beaming out from my heart center, connecting to the animal's heart center. And the animal could be in the room with me, they could be on the other side of the world, and I might just have a picture of them just to help guide where I'm putting my awareness. But essentially, I'm just connecting heart to heart with them. And then I mentally introduce myself to them and invite them into the conversation. And typically, just doing those steps are enough to start a session with them.
Do you always find them willing to communicate, or do they have to be coaxed?
They're not always willing, and that is fine. Just like if you were to be called up, at any time of the day from anybody, whether it's a stranger or somebody you're not always in the it's not always the right time for you. You know what I'm saying? So the same for animals. And also some animals do tend to be more nervous of strangers. And if I'm a stranger to them, they might feel a little hesitant about communicating. So what I like to have people do who have yes, so people who have scheduled with me, I will ask my clients to tell their animals out loud that they've scheduled a session with me, that I'll be connecting to them. And I'll also have them tell their animals out loud what things they're hoping their animal might want to talk about and why they've scheduled the session. And the reason I have them do that is so that the animal can almost like be a little bit more prepared for the session. It's not going to feel quite so out of the blue to have me connect to them.
Makes me think of something. So
Hmm.
our animals, I mean, if you're a pet lover, and if you have animals, you talk to them all the time. You explain things to them, you tell them what's going on. I mean, you just do. It's just part of our lives. Do they understand us?
A lot of the time they do. And because what's happening when we're talking out loud to our animals, we're
Hmm.
automatically, without even noticing, we're automatically sending them the energy of what we're trying to communicate as well. So you're telling your dogs that you're going to go on a walk soon, you're sending them that energy and they're picking up on the impressions in a similar way to when we're receiving communication from them. And so often they are getting the gist of a lot of it. Obviously, there's going to be some communication difficulties as well. So people will often send mixed signals to their animals. So, for example, if their dog likes to jump on people as a way to greet them at the door, and we might say, don't jump on people. And then we're sending them essentially the image of them jumping on people. It's like saying, don't think of an elephant, you're going to think of an elephant. It's very confusing. So when it comes to our own communication with our animals, it's really helpful to make sure that we're focusing on what we would love for them to do instead, or what we'd love for them to focus on. So in the case of a dog jumping on people, you can say no and stop, of course, but it's also really helpful to tell them what you'd love for them to do instead. So when you're greeting people, if you can keep all 4 feet on the floor, or greet people calmly, please, and how grateful we are when you're greeting people in a calm manner. So it's just really helping to clarify for the dog what you're asking for.
My dogs are guilty of that. They're barkers, and they
Yes.
jump on people. And I have someone coming over later today to help me with some stuff here at the house. And I'm going to talk to them ahead of time and tell them I want all feet on the floor and I don't want them barking. But I just think they're 7 and that's ingrained in their psyche. I don't know if I just
There's
have to do that all the time with them.
Yeah, it's when it comes to behaviors, when I'm doing a session, I will often kind of feel on a spectrum where that animal is at in terms of why they're doing it. Is it very instinctual? Is it an instinctual behavior? Is it just because they think they're supposed to? Because sometimes, I remember I did a session for this is a few years ago, but I did a session for a dog who every time he went on a walk with his humans, he would bark throughout the whole neighborhood as a way to like announce himself. Or when he came to doggy daycare, he'd bark again as a way to announce himself. And once we had the conversation, and he thought that was something he was supposed to do. That was a good thing. He thought he was being helpful. And so luckily, since it wasn't necessarily instinctual, and it wasn't necessarily based in an anxiety. It was purely because he thought he should do it. It was easy to communicate with him. Hey, that's actually not very helpful, and this other behavior is what your human is really hoping you'll do. And he was very open to that and actually did end up shifting it pretty easily. Other circumstances are going to be different. Either there's anxiety at the base of it, or they've been trained in a certain way where they've, thought this is how they're supposed to do it. Often, with the dog that jumps on people, they've been rewarded in a sense from their perspective from jumping on people, that they're getting the attention that they're seeking. So it's almost like it's been trained in them. And so in those cases, you might need other things like doing training with them to really help solidify in their mind a different behavior that's more wanted in that situation, or things that are going to help anxiety if there's anxiety involved. So it can be very different from case to case and what's needed.
Is it appropriate? I mean, I'm going to have a little chat with them before my neighbors
Yes.
come over. Is it appropriate to reinforce with treats the behavior when you want them to do it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just like us, we kind of we humans, we also need an incentive to do something. If a person's telling us to do something that we're not, necessarily wanting to do, we like to see a reason for it. We like to have an incentive for it. And the same, obviously, for animals as well. It's not just enough to tell them to do something. So rewards are always a good thing. It really can help solidify for the animal what we really want to do and help give them a reason to do that too. Treats are, I feel like,
All the time, give them treats when people come over.
you might have to talk with the trainer actually, who can better help you with that then too. I mean, it's possible if they're very food motivated and they're really interested in the treats that you're giving, then they might. I know with my, like, Gilly, who we talked about earlier, my cat, she is very good at convincing her humans to give treats for any and all situations.
Okay. You can relate then.
Yes.
How do you handle skepticism or doubt that people may have that you can talk to animals?
It's a good question because with animal communication, as opposed to mediumship, animal communication is less inflammatory of a topic to bring up, because with mediumship, there's a lot of assumptions people make just from the idea of me saying that there is an afterlife, and with animal communication, I think it comes across as a little bit more whimsical to people, or that I'm just kind of a little bit kooky, maybe, and they don't take it as personal, the fact when I say that I'm an animal communicator. And so I don't know that I've come up really against a whole lot of skepticism with animal communication. I mean, obviously there has been some here and there, but it's one of these things you just got to experience it. With animal communication, when I'm doing a session, the way I like to structure it is that I like to first of all, I like to go into the session without knowing anything about what's going on in the animal's life. Like I don't like to go into it knowing what questions their human has for their animal, that kind of thing. I prefer to go into it with a blank slate. I like to know the animal's name and what they look like if I'm not there in person, and their gender. But other than that, I like to go into it with a blank slate. And then I allow the animal to guide the conversation for at least the first half of the session, just to kind of see, what does the animal want to talk about? What are things that are top of mind for them? And often in that time that they're guiding the conversation, they're sharing things with me that their person can verify is true about that animal. And so it's not a perfect system because it's always going to be a little bit dependent on what the animal wants to talk about, and also how communicative they are and how good of a communicator they are. But typically, there will be some type of verification in that process that we are communicating. And if I am getting things that are totally off and wrong about that animal in that first part of the session, then that's a good sign for me that, okay, let's, stop the session and either reschedule to a different day, or I can refer the person to a different person. But that just, that I'm not giving erroneous information. I'm not saying that the animal is saying something when they're not really saying something. So that's how I approach a session, so that we can be sure that we're actually communicating. And it's something that I encourage my students to do as well. But ultimately, there are going to be some things that can't be verified too in the session. And so there has to be some room for that, because it's hard to verify the fact that your dog really hates the neighbor, if you're not necessarily sure. So it's I don't know. I don't have to engage with skeptics a whole lot, but I think the way that I approach the sessions do help do away with that kind of thing too.
Well, that's one thing I really like about your sessions, and I haven't done one with my doggies, but you don't want to know anything. You
Mm-hmm.
don't. You want people to come in as a blank slate and sit with you, and then you start talking, and then they will verify,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
And then after that period in which the animal can guide the conversation, then we can open up to questions that the human has. Because sometimes with some animals, the things they want to talk about are totally different than what the human wants to talk about. And so I want to make sure we honor all sides of it. So, that as well. But often the animal will have already brought up those things in the first part of the session themselves without their human needing to even ask the question.
This is so fascinating, Taya. It really is. I remember when I was taking your classes, and about the horse. I love riding horses, so I love horses. And I remember we were standing there and tuning into the horse, and you never negate anybody and what the message is that they get. Everybody's telling these really elaborate things about the horse and his upbringing and blah, blah, blah. And then you ask me, and I go, all I feel is love. I just feel so much love from that horse to you. And that's all I felt. And I felt I did okay because that's all I could feel was all the love that the horse is sending to you.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, your classes are, I don't know, to me at first I was scared, I was
Yeah.
nervous, but you always put everyone at ease in learning, going through and really building us up. So I appreciate that.
Oh, good, good.
Is the communication different from species to species?
No, it's the same. So the way I like to think about it is that when I am intending to communicate something to an animal, I am sending them the energy of what I'm trying to communicate, and then that energy is being translated for that animal in a way they can understand it. And then it's the same going the opposite way. They are sending me the energy of what they're wanting to communicate, and then that is being translated for me through images in my mind's eye, sounds in my head, and feelings in my body in a way that I can understand it. That process is the same no matter what species of animals. I haven't really noticed a big difference communicating with a dog versus a chicken versus, a panther. It's all similar.
When you do the communication and have that session, does it take a lot out of you? Do you have to refresh in some way?
It can with animal communication with living animals. It tends to feel less draining than connecting or communicating with an animal that's passed or a human that's passed away.
Can you think of a time when you were communicating with an animal that had a really positive effect on the animal's life? And I don't mean to put you on the spot with that question. We can skip it if you want.
Yeah, well, I can think of a couple of instances in which okay, so I have one instance that I'm thinking about, and it's actually in the book as well. But there was a client who came to me for her dog who was starting to exhibit a lot of aggressive behaviors. She said she had brought him to the vet already. They said there was no sign of pain. But when I communicated with the dog, he was actually showing me a lot of pain, especially in his hips, I believe, and also in the mouth. It was one of these situations. It was a little awkward for me because, I was sharing what was coming through from the animal and sharing that this is where he's having pain and this is why he's been protecting his body more and being more aggressive as well. She was saying, well, she had brought him to the vet recently. The vet said there was no pain. And then I'm a little bit stuck in a situation where this is what the dog is saying, but I can hear what you're saying. So just in case, I acknowledged for the dog that he keeps insisting on this. And just in case, I also just approached it from a perspective of, let's say this was behavioral and more based in anxiety, So I tried to talk the dog through it a little bit, how I would if that was the case. But ultimately, I told the person that I don't think this is going to resolve until the pain is addressed. So I walked away from that session, and maybe a year later or 6 months or something like that, the client emailed me and let me know that after that session, she had brought her dog back to the vet and insisted on getting some x-rays done or pictures done. And they had found a quite severe hip dysplasia or something similar to that, I think, and also seen that the teeth were totally ground down as well. And so once the dog got on the pain meds, his personality totally changed and he was back to a very happy-go-lucky boy. And so it's those kinds of things, that one just sticks out to me that is obviously that's kind of a big change for that dog. Luckily being able to have that pain acknowledged and taken care of so that he wasn't, biting at people anymore. But there's many other instances, but that one just comes to mind.
You can share more if you'd like too.
There's just
find this fascinating.
There's just so many different ones. It's like I talked about, sometimes with the sessions, just from the conversation, the animal will shift some of their behaviors just because they've had things explained to them in a way that makes sense to them, and then sometimes there's other things that are needed. But I have, and this isn't like a huge life-changing thing for the animal per se, but sometimes it can be for the human. But I have often worked with animals that are waking their humans up at night. Animals that are often waking their humans up at night. So either from playing, or meowing really loudly at night, or waking their humans up for food really early, that kind of thing that often comes up in my sessions. I have found that animal communication, just the conversation, explaining to the animal why humans need just like one long sleep at night that's undisturbed, and how happy it makes us that they help us with that. Just those explanations can really help, and they will actually shift their behavior. And that is something that I've seen even with my own cat. So Gilly, as you know, she's very food motivated. She used to come in very early in the morning into the bedroom and just do this very loud meow, meow, meow until somebody would wake up and get up and go and feed them. And so I had to have several conversations with Gilly, sharing with her why we need our sleep at night. We're not built to just nap all day long like they are.
They do.
Explaining that to her, and how much I appreciate her being really calm and quiet in the morning, how much I appreciate her just laying and snuggling next to me as a gentle way to engage with me, but quietly, so that I can have like more sleep and wake up in a more peaceful way. And she has shifted her behavior a lot, so she doesn't ever meow in the morning anymore unless we have a visitor. So if we have a visitor come stay at our house, then she will often go and meow at their door if she can. So yes, she's a very smart girl though.
She is smart. What advice would you give to people who want to improve their communication with animals?
I think so. First of all, I'd be very aware of the way in which you're phrasing things for your animals. It's like we talked about earlier, making sure with any behaviors that you're really focusing on what you'd love for them to do instead, so that your own communication with them is as clear as possible. And in terms of hearing the communication from your animals, tends to be a little bit of a different process, because we're all very comfortable talking to our animals already, and we're all naturally sending the communication to them already. But hearing what they're communicating with us can be a little bit trickier, just because it is a lot more subtle. It feels very subtle, just like with mediumship, it can feel very subtle. So the impressions coming through that they're giving you are subtle. So it's really helpful to make the time every day, if possible, set aside a little bit of time to just quiet your own thoughts, meditate, that kind of thing. And then you can certainly invite your animal to share with you. If you have a question with them, you can ask them your question and see if you get a response through any of your senses. You can make an event out of it where you're meditating first, and then connecting out heart to heart with them, just visualizing a connection there, and then asking them your questions and seeing what you get in response. The other way to do it, though, that I often find most people appreciate, because they might find that they're overthinking what they're getting a lot, that kind of thing. So if that tends to be you, then what I would recommend is that let's say you have a question or two for your animal. You can let your animal know what those questions are. I would keep it just to one or two, and let them know that you'd love to hear the response or get the response in the next day or so. And then you just kind of go about your day and don't really think about it anymore. And then throughout the day, I want you to then just notice, do you get any sort of sudden impressions out of the blue? Like, for example, you're doing the dishes, and then all of a sudden in your mind's eye, you see your dog in your mind's eye, and then you get a feeling of pain in your back. That would probably be the communication coming through from your dog answering your questions.
So cool, Thea. I am so going to do that.
Yes, good.
Yeah, because well, my animals, if you ever meet them, they're unique.
Yes.
Just like your kitty is unique. Yeah. I want to show everybody your book. It
Yes.
is on my shelf, and it's beautifully done.
Oh, good. Oh, yay.
Isn't that gorgeous? So next time I see you, guess what I'm going to want?
Me to sign it.
Yep, you just sign it because there's nothing in there.
No, yes, I'd be happy to.
Seriously, when I read this, I got so many tips, and it was really in depth. I was really, really pleased. I mean, I
Good.
loved your book. And I'm
Yeah,
not just saying that
great.
because I know you. I mean, I really did love your book.
Oh, thank you.
And this is still up on Barnes and Nobles and Amazon.
Yes, you can get it in store in Barnes and Nobles. You can get it also at other smaller bookstores. You can find it on Amazon as well. And there's also an audiobook version where I'm the narrator, and for anybody who likes to listen to books instead.
Is there anything else you would like to share about animal communication or um,
I just want to share that it's fun way to engage with our animals as well, and it can add so much depth to our bond with animals too. So I want to encourage everybody, especially if they have animals themselves, to try it out with their own animal companions too, because it's probably not going to hurt, and it's probably just going to add a lot to your own connection with them. And they're probably going to be so grateful that you're even trying.
and I appreciate that. And I'm going to start doing that right after I get off,
Great.
where my friends come over to help me. Well, thank you so much. And I think we might want to revisit this topic because I think it's going to be fascinating for a lot of people. And
I'd
I know
love
you're
to.
super busy right now, so we'll just kind of
Yes.
see how that goes. But I want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you.